Sí, enciéndelo.
Hello again. Now we have a Q&A session with Abelardo. So all the questions that you had in, from his talk, now is your time to do it. If you want to make a question, raise your hand. I will try to, as the best I can, to keep the order in which you raise your hand. So I try to give a floor to everyone. So we will start.
Carlos Monroy from Rice University. Thank you very much for your talk. I really enjoyed it very much. Kind of in the middle, you talk about the observing students. And so how the activities they do. And at the end, there was this choice of reality and illusion. So our work in learning analytics is in K-12. So where one of the main problems is the lack of computers in the classroom. So how do you see adapting this kind of technology in the K-12 environment?
Okay, let me just say up front that I'm no expert in K through 12, so I give you my perspective from the barrier, so to speak. I do have 2 kids, so I am somewhat familiar with K through 12, but that's as much as it goes. Activities are different there, and the level of feedback that teachers obtain is mainly based on observation, and it's actually quite a high quality feedback. The way I see technology entering that space is by gradual activities. So students eventually will go to a computer room or eventually will have a certain amount of time with an electronic device, and then you can increase your observation like that. There is another trend also documented with the advent of Khan Academy, right? In which some schools ask their students to review certain videos there. And of course you can get some information out of there. But I think the big impact has to be when students use the computer for a certain amount of time that has a big percentage of the week, let's just say 2-3 days a week. And then the teaching staff provides the type of activities that engage certain events with those equipment. And from my point of view, we are not there yet for that. But it would be the way, this gradual adoption as technology is entering the everyday activities of the kids.
Hi, Abelardo. I'd like you to think about say a bit about intervention strategies, right? So you get the data coming back. What kind of thinking has gone on at your end about what you do with that? So I'll give you an example, right? You said that you saw that some of the most effective students using particular tools, or that high-performing students engaged in what you called key actions. I wasn't quite sure what those examples of key actions were. You might give us 1 or 2 just to make it concrete. But then the question is, what am I going to do with this? Now, one of the big differences between, say, business intelligence in a corporate setting and learning is that in a corporate setting, if you think that somebody could be more efficient or is not seeing a piece of information they should, or should be using a tool they shouldn't, then the obvious thing to do is tell them as fast as possible so they can get on. But in a learning context, you might not want to do that because they have to figure it out themselves. Maybe there's important metacognition going on about the ability to choose the right tool for the job. And if you just tell them what to do, of course, you have supplanted that whole sense-making process themselves. So I wondered whether you could say a little bit about what you do with this intelligence. And the fact that you know high-performing students do certain things doesn't necessarily mean you just tell everybody to do that, right?
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and it's something that we definitely take into account. I recently was talking to somebody from UTS also in Sydney and say, well, the fact that you have a mathematical model that says that you as a student have 25% probability of passing the course doesn't force you to go and talk to that student and say, you know, you have 25% probability from where you're coming from. So let me give you an example of the kind of information we're collecting, and it's related to this use of the tools. And the key actions are basically a characterization of 2-3 steps that appear very frequently by a large number of students. So it would be the equivalent of the keywords of a document. It would be the key actions of an activity. So what we did with that is two things. One was when you go to the lecture, then you start approaching the activity trying to justify or trying to promote the use of these tools that we knew they would correlate with high achieving students. So it's not that you go to the lower achieving students and say, you know, you should use these tools. You make it like a generic statement. So you adapt a little bit the activity to say, okay, let's emphasize why these tools are important, and you do that. That's one level of intervention. A second level of intervention is reviewing the activity itself. Maybe the use of that tool is not portrayed as something essential. And we have found ourselves doing something like that, driving them to some sort of objective that is much more compelling or motivating. Or one of the examples we have, using the tool was very good for detecting anomalies in a program. We managed to connect that with cracking a password. So the activity is, do you want to crack a password? Why? Because we detected that students were not engaging with that tool. However, if the motivation was, do you want to do an exercise on how to crack a password, which was not very realistic, but the highlight was really a catch line. So we derived that intervention based on our observation. So the key actions came back and it's like, they're not using this tool as much as they should. How can we change that? So we thought about refocusing the activity, making it a bit more compelling, connected it more to reality, and then we saw an increase in the number of students that would use that tool. So these are the kind of interventions. I personally think that the intuition that instructors have about what happens in the environment, we shouldn't waste that. That's a very valuable resource. Instructors already have a lot of intuition of what is happening. So we are leaning more towards talking to the instructor and say, look, this is what happens. How would you go about and deal with that? How would you intervene? And they typically know how to approach. So if you see that somebody is failing systematically all the tests, most of the instructors won't go and talk to that person directly, why are you failing all the tests? But they will approach, so how's it going? What kind of topics are you struggling with most? And we're happy with that. So the information is still there for them to make the final decision on how to approach the student or how to approach the focus of the activity or the entire group if you have a problem with the group dynamics. Another good example we had was observing how teams interacted and trying to detect patterns for conflict in teams. We assumed that when you do teamwork, conflicts appear, period. That's the way it works. And we told them that. You're going to start working on a team in a project. This is the project, so you'll have to be dealing with the project and probably quite a lot of time with a conflict. So we knew that. Now our analysis started to detect patterns that would point in the direction of certain conflicts. One of them, for example, is the member of a team that says, you know, this is a very interesting project, all of you step aside, I'll do it. That's a conflict, that's an anomaly. You can detect that very easily because you have an unusual number of events for one member of the team and the other ones are virtually none. So you can approach the team and the instructor, just looking at that graph, goes to the team and the first question, so how is load balancing working here? So you're getting into the issue directly. So I think these kind of interventions are subtle and they should consider instructor as part of the equation.
I have another question about the virtual machine as a platform. One of the things that I've been thinking is that sort of from an outside perspective is that there's a thing called the LMS, there's a thing that's managed by the institution's IT group, and to the extent that it has all the modules that people want to use, it's lovely and it does its thing. And then usually there's a few other modules that professors are using, somebody's using, and they're not integrated, the data's not being shared, and like that. And so one of the things I've been thinking about is, which way is it headed? Are we trying harder to make it easier to integrate these things from the outside, these extra things, or are we trying harder to include everything in an LMS? And so in particular, when I saw what you're doing with the virtual machine, I was starting to think, I wonder if that is a model for for doing this type of analytics, for offering students these content learning tools, for a platform. Do you see the virtual machine as a platform where you can add your class to it and build the tools that you want to do teaching within that class and sort of integrate it more easily with some of the other learning analytics stuff going on at the institution?
Very good question, actually. And it points to an issue that we observed. It's a different way of saying what you just said, but I think it goes along that line, which is students felt comfortable with the fact that they had something specific for the course. It was clearly delimited. We would only observe the events occurring there, and at the end of the course, you delete that thing, and everything goes back to normal. So that's something that the students give a lot of value. We also had the alternative of telling the students, install this tracker on your personal computer because we want to know what you're doing. That's quite far away from that. So I think I agree with you. There is a trend. I think the way to put it into words would be, we have to be aware that students work on your course or work on a learning experience for a certain amount of time. So we shouldn't get ourselves too pretentious and say, no, 80% of your time you're going to devote to, no. I mean, over the week, it's going to be 5% of the time. So I should occupy 5% of your space in the computer. Now, the issue with the LMS, I think you have to acknowledge that both contexts need to coexist, so to speak, because you have a lot of interaction also based on discussion forums. If you throw in things like wikis and blogs, which are very powerful and very engaging for students, LMS, it's a good meeting point. Now, having said that, what I would like to see is LMSs acknowledging that a sizable portion of what a student uses is outside of its boundary. And it's okay. You just need to work out the issues of communication. And on top of that, you have to also acknowledge that this environment that is outside of the LMS has to be very respectful with the rest of the environment in which not the student, the person moves. And from that point of view, the virtual machine was surprising in the sense that it offered a very interesting trade-off. Now, do I see the virtual machine as a model? If you abstract that essence, I think it's something that is worth maintaining. Is virtual appliance the technology for that? I'm not so sure about that. But some sort of, another idea that came also along the lines with a virtual machine, and it's a technology that is out of fashion, but you're taping this, right? You're recording this. I wouldn't be surprised if web OSs come back, big time. You know that HP had a product, and they canceled the product. But if you think of it, a web OS is a fairly delimited environment which comes to your desktop through your browser, and it's a fully functional operating system. So between you and I, it's almost like a virtual machine, right?
In all cases, the question I was asking is whether or not this environment, this operating system environment, is an added value above and beyond the application, even the application's ability to implement an API for logging transportation.
In the sense that, so the answer to your question is, it comes from this notion of limiting our observation. And I think users resonate to that. So I'm giving you something that you know when you're in and when you're out. When you're in, I'm tracking you. When you're out, you're on your own. And they appreciate that.
Hi, I'm Vanessa from Malta. I just wanted to ask you, because in your course, the students were engineers, so then we're talking about something from the scientific side. How would something which you did reconcile with humanities? So, for example, I'm at a faculty of education, and we have pre-service teachers, people who are studying, training to become teachers. So we encourage a lot of reflective practice in writing, and also the way that our students are encouraged to use tools. It's not tools per se, like engineers would be using tools, but different kinds of tools. So how do you think this could be reconciled?
Okay, let me say first that this is an opinion from an engineer, so you have to take it as such, okay? But let me try to be as neutral as possible in terms of the environment. I would focus on the activity. So you design these activities. You want to engage them in these activities. If they are technology mediated, that's the starting point for tracking what happens. So try to think about activities that are technology mediated. So I'm going to go out on a ledge here and say, suppose that in your pre-service teachers, they have to do a lot of self-reflection. Okay, make sure that you provide them with a tool to write that self-reflection. Make sure they exchange it with the instructor or with somebody else. Make sure you give them some sort of additional questions to discuss. So what you're doing is increasing their engagement, but with technology mediation. Okay, and then you start getting back these reports. Then you can motivate that even further by completing with activities. You have face-to-face education, is that so? So in the face-to-face session, you make it such, if you have participated in these activities with a level of engagement that is okay, then the activity in class will be a success. You know, it will be a good debate. Things like, for example, explaining each of you, or in groups of 3 or 4, your point, justify your point, let's vote the best point. So that is, these are measures that increase the engagement. If you increase the engagement, then you enter in this loop. People get engaged, they get feedback, it's exciting, the activity works, and then they start deriving more activity towards technology mediated. So ideally, I think the paradigm would apply in other environments other than engineering. And it is true. With engineers, it's all about tools, electronic tools, so it's very easy to say, please do these exercises with this tool because I'm going to track you. But if you enter this context of write something about it, run a wiki, run a blog. I did an experiment, and this is not entirely observing events, but there is some sort of connection. People studying neuropsychology. I was teaching a course on scientific writing, and I did a very simple exercise. I told them, I'm going to give you a percentage of your score if you tweet every time you do something in the course. Only 2 conditions. You have to tweet whatever you want, just the name of the activity, that's it, okay? And you have to do that regularly. That's it. If you do that, then I'll give you a certain amount of... So, again, it was not an engineer context. But what I wanted to do is to interact with technology while they are doing something. Then the other trick that I play is like, you should include certain hashtag. And even though I wasn't asking them explicitly to tell me their feelings, very quickly some of the users, I'm writing this essay, which by the way is very difficult and I'm struggling with it, even though I was just requesting something like, I'm beginning to write the assignment. And then the other bonus was that very obviously, people that already knew how Twitter worked, the next thing you do is you search for the hashtag. So you get a sense very quickly of the activity in the course. And then I asked them for, well, I didn't need to ask them, you actually can do that, their Twitter age, the number of posts in Twitter before the course started. And most of them were new to Twitter. And then at the end I told them, so what do you think about that? And they said, well, you know, it was interesting because I could see what was happening with the rest of my colleagues. I also realized that, you know, I don't work that frequently or so consistently. So it was good for them, and it could be derived that activity through a technology platform with a little bit of effort and always sustained by an activity that makes sense. The way I argued that to them was time management is a problem for everybody. There are people that acknowledge they have a problem with time management and people that do not acknowledge it, but it's there, right? So the way I argued to them is it's just something for you to get in touch with your time management skills. That's it. So low adoption barrier. And they were not engineers, and it was a good exercise to be able to capture feedback and to derive a little activity and make it pass through technology.
My name's Garen Hiller. I'm from CAST, and I was just curious if you saw any behavior changes over time with the students electing to stop using the tool that was providing you with information, and if you saw that behavior, were there some reasons that you were able to get from some of those students?
Yeah, the most common behavior was a small percentage of students would disable the whole thing at the beginning of the course, right at the beginning. So the day you present the approach, this is a virtual machine, it's very convenient, we're tracking a bunch of things to provide you some feedback, and you can disable it like that. We would see like some of them, a small percentage that would disable it, and that was it for the rest of the course. What we didn't see is people disabling in the middle of the course. Even though, again, every time they popped up this equipment, the virtual appliance, they were reminded that we were tracking them. But as soon as they got used to it, you know, I think they perceive also the value. So some other idea that is underneath this technique is that we provide them something that was valuable to them. This is self-configured. Everything has been taken care of for you. So you also have to acknowledge that. If you ask them, please fill out this form, please do this, please do that. In our case, I mean, we know we have only this amount of patients, them with us, right? They have that amount of patients. So if by the third survey we pass through them and say, forget it. I mean, this is not the course. So we are also trying to be very careful about what we ask from them. And that's the reason why we said, if you want to disable, this is the way it works. It's going to be there every time you power up. That's it. We don't bother you anymore. The course is the important thing, the activities.
Well, thank you for the very good presentation this morning and discussion. My name is Jeroen Donks from Maastricht University, Netherlands. I want to elaborate a little bit on the connection between instructional design and learner analytics, because you mentioned that. I have a similar history. I was teaching computer science in a very classical way, and now I'm teaching instructional design. So. Well, I'm not
familiar with the middle space then too.
So it's a real jump, and I look back to how I was doing things. I think, oh my God. Okay, but in this connection, okay. I should not touch the bottom. I think of it. What is the most important? That you should start with what you can measure and then change your design, or make your design and then decide what to measure? Or is it both? I think, what's your opinion about that?
That's a very good question. Knowing what you are capable of measuring, it's something good to have next to you before you start designing. That would be my answer. If you go off and design the activities, then you might find yourself that if you're relying on knowing about certain events, and it's not possible to track because the way you design the activities. So I wouldn't say that you need to start with your measuring capability, but you should have some sort of like an approximate idea next to you and say, okay, if I am more or less in this ballpark in terms of the amount of information I'll be able to have, let me design activities that will be able to be adjusted based on that. So I would say half and half. That would be my answer.
Thank you very much. It was a wonderful talk today. That was beautiful. Margaret Korosek from University of Hull. I'm curious about the virtual machine and how you might think that would apply to a self-paced environment. Thank you.
The big advantage for a self-paced environment is that it is extremely handy in the sense that it's right there for you to power up and down whenever you want. The difficulty is on scheduling or organizing activities that they require maybe interaction with somebody else. But from the point of view of just tracking your individual behavior, that would be a perfect example, I would say. I don't see any significant differences between self-paced learning and a regular environment. Now, the fact that in a non-self-paced learning you have a fairly strict schedule or rigid schedule just works towards your advantage. I mean, you know when your events will come. In a self-paced environment, it's more like asynchronous, more waiting for the activities to happen. But I think you still have the possibility of observing what happened in detail and then relay back some information and ask maybe afterwards, what was your approach to that? How did it feel? Was it useful? So yeah, I think it deploys equally well there. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Also, my name is Joost Maleros again for your engaging talk. I have a question about group activity and measuring it. You just talked a little bit about it, about saying, okay, I see more activity from one person than the others in the group. But could you elaborate a little bit more on how you measure group activity and what your learnings were?
Okay, so our attempt, and it's following the pattern that I described before, our attempt to derive certain activities towards technology were things like, for example, we provide the students with a platform to exchange documents seamlessly. To put it plainly, Dropbox. It was not exactly Dropbox, but now, and with the digital natives, It's very easy. You say, here's your folder, put everything there. They know how to do it. They do that with their eyes closed. So as soon as you see that, you start detecting patterns of who is contributing more. Then the other trick we use is, as part of the methodology, we want them to meet, and each meeting should be about creating some minutes, and those minutes should be in this folder with this name convention, and the structure of the minutes should be who attended, what did you do, what are the final conclusions and the action items. And that's another attempt to formalize interaction and then push it through some technology-mediated channel. We didn't go as far as to detect meetings with some sort of microphones or motion detection or anything like that. We rely mostly on this type of events, on exchanging documents with each other and see how frequently do you meet. And then the other thing we did to correlate was self-reported. At the end of the session, we would run a very short survey. It's actually a piece of paper like this, telling what kind of conflict you think your team has and the intensity of the conflict, just to make sure that we could estimate things like that. And I agree it was not very comprehensive, but it gave us a little bit of information about how to intervene. So teachers, for example, the main consequence, instructors would walk into the room, you would have 8 teams, and based on that information that you are collecting, you are going to talk to 2 or 3 of them first. And you're going to devote maybe much more time with them because you are detecting that something is going on. And then the events are telling you that the other teams are functioning fairly okay, so you would leave them for last. And even though you might say, well, this is unfair, I would like to portray like a much more efficient use of instructor time.
Hello, Mirko Raza from EPFL Switzerland. A question, you were mentioning before the students need to be active, then engaged, motivated for learning. I think it was at the bottom of your pyramid, if I'm not mistaken. Later you mentioned that you're measuring emotional response with Kinect. Can you comment on where you're going with those researchers' directions?
We haven't connected the dots, actually. So what we're working on right now is making sure that our models to predict emotional engagement are accurate with Kinect. The idea for that would be to deploy it in activities that require students engaging with some sort of resource that needs their maximum participation, so to speak, and avoiding boredom as well. So I'm going to put you through this exercise. You are supposed to write these answers. Let me see if it is something terribly boring or you are really motivated and engaged. And we also are exploring the connection between emotional recognition and writing activities. Because sometimes you can go back to the students with some feedback and said, look, you wrote that document, but we detected that your level of engagement, well, we're never going to address them in those terms, right? But we detect that your level of engagement was very variable. So you should focus on your task. You should think about the concepts you want to write, then write one, then the other. So you can give a little bit of advice on how to approach the writing procedure. And that would be connected with the type of emotions we detect, and more precisely with engagement. Okay.
Okay, join me again to thank Abelardo. Thank you for your meaningful answers, and I hope everybody leaves now with clear idea of what you presented in the morning. Thank you. You are invited to follow the other session because we will have the next item in the agenda is the launch at 1:30. What time is the launch? Well, the launch is the next activity. If you can join the other session if you want.